Okay, I imagine we're going to have more people joining, but at this point, I'd like to go ahead and get started. It means a lot to my team that you're all here today to attend our DevOps webinar. We're definitely glad you're here. I want to note this isn't meant to be a map to certification like our DevOps Foundation course, but to give you all a cursory idea as to what DevOps is and why it's been so popular in the industry as a loose framework. I've worked with several of y'all before. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Global Link's Business Development Manager, Walt, and I'm readily available to y'all should you have any course questions, but we do have a lot to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John Buck, who we're very lucky to have. John was a very early adopter of DevOps, and he's worked with the DevOps Institute since its inception. So John, if you'd be so kind to take it away for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Walt.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to spending the next hour with you to talk about DevOps. This is taken from an official DevOps Foundation certification course that is sponsored by the DevOps Institute. The goals today are to increase your understanding of the reasoning behind DevOps, to share with you the DevOps principles, the values, the practices, the benefits, and the implementation practices. And while we talk about implementation practices, in reality, DevOps is more of a movement or a journey. It's not a project that you implement like many of you are familiar with standard project management. So we're going to start out identifying what is DevOps. And we'll do that with the definition of DevOps that comes from Wikipedia. And you'll notice that it's a cultural and professional movement that stresses communication and collaboration and integration between software developers and IT operations professionals while automating the process of software delivery and infrastructure changes. And you might ask to start out with, well, why are you using a definition from Wikipedia? And we're doing that because there is no one definitive definition of DevOps or the DevOps practices. And what we do in this introduction and in our DevOps Foundation class is we've collected things from a number of different sources, and it's that collective body of knowledge that we share with you as part of DevOps. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. A couple of things to note from the definition here. It's a cultural and professional movement. So it's not a practice, it's not a methodology, it's a movement. And by speaking of it culturally, in order to adopt DevOps, you're going to need to be making changes in people's behaviors, most likely. And so with that, it stresses communication and collaboration and integration. So as you might suspect with DevOps, it includes development and operations people, but it also includes the rest of the people in IT as well as your business customers. So with that, it's important that unlike traditional communication within IT where Dev and Ops are separate and distinct, with DevOps you want to improve communication and collaboration. So with that, it also includes, the definition includes automating the process of software delivery. You don't have to have automation to do DevOps, but automation is what makes DevOps successful. So that's why it's included in the definition. So another way of looking at DevOps is to look at what DevOps is not. It's not a title, although if you go into LinkedIn and do a search for DevOps engineer, you're going to find a lot of people with that title. You'll also find jobs out there with the title of DevOps engineer, but there's no recognized professional title of a DevOps engineer. So DevOps is not a team. So although some organizations choose as part of their implementation to put the people working on DevOps into a single organizational unit, it's not clear that that's the direction that everyone should go. But I will point out that it has been increasing as a percentage of organizations over the last few years. DevOps is not a tool. While automation is a key component to being efficient with DevOps, and there are lots of vendors that have DevOps tools, that's not what DevOps is, as you're going to learn as we go through. It's not only culture, and while we need to make cultural changes, it's beyond culture. And it's not only automation. So it's a series of practices that we're going to be learning some about from a high perspective. Why DevOps and why now? So this is a quote from Alan Alter at Accenture that's identifying that there's a shift now to an outcome economy where instead of competing by selling products and services, organizations are competing by selling measurable results important to the customer. So it's an economy where buyers are looking to buy an outcome and sellers are selling the promise of an outcome. And I use this as an example that if you go to a comedy club, from the comedian's perspective, they may measure their results by how many jokes they tell per hour. But as a consumer, you don't care how many jokes they tell. What you care is how many you laugh at. So that's an example of the outcome economy. So there are a number of things that are driving DevOps, and I'll just illustrate a couple of them. Every business has become a technology business. We talked about customers valuing outcomes, not products. And customer delight is more important than customer satisfaction. And if you look at that list could have been written from a business perspective, but it can also be written from an IT perspective, in that the list would be just the same from both perspectives. So what are some of the IT challenges that you're confronted with today? You're being pushed to go faster and faster, but at the same time, the expectation is that you're not going to risk quality. Individually, the organizations such as Dev and Ops have been working to increase the value that they deliver. So for example, in development, they've been using Agile as a means to improve the software development process. Within operations, they've been using IT service management, or ITIL, as a means to improve the processes within operations. There's also been a movement toward automation, but each of those contributes to improvement. But with DevOps, what we do is take all of those things and put them together and establish shared goals and shared values, and we look to increase the value that you deliver to the business holistically. So oftentimes it's IT's silo culture that is constraining the value stream of the organization as a whole. So sometimes this is represented by a wall of confusion between Dev and Ops, in that Dev is focused on change, so it's focused on change, while operations is focused on stability. And what we seek to achieve with DevOps is a balance between the two, and that's what the business is looking for. They're looking for both quicker delivery as well as increased stability. So there are a number of principles associated with DevOps. In fact, it's 3, and they are called the 3 ways. And these came from a business novel called The Phoenix Project. And the first way is to increase the flow from left to right. And in this case, it's from development to operations. So you're looking to deliver software more quickly. The second way is the importance of providing feedback. And while the second way in the drawing shows feedback from ops to dev, we'll actually see as we learn more about DevOps that you're looking to increase feedback throughout the development process, because the sooner you can find out there are issues and resolve them, the less cost there is to the organization as a whole. Last but not least is the third way. And this way involves continuous experimentation and learning. And, that's been done for many years through continual service improvement from an ITIL perspective, through the Deming cycle that some of you may have some experience with. And what we're acknowledging here as part of DevOps is that we need to be constantly learning and experimenting and improving. That's also shows up in Agile. Part of the benefit of Agile software development is to get faster feedback from your customers. So the 3 ways are the principles of DevOps. I mentioned that DevOps isn't a methodology in and of itself, but it does rely on several other methodologies and practices. And while this diagram doesn't show it as a 3-legged stool, I like to think of it as a 3-legged stool because it takes these 3 frameworks in order to support DevOps. So it starts out with Agile, where you're looking to speed the writing of the code and the delivery of software. And as part of DevOps, we extend Agile all the way through to operations. So the traditional definition of done with Agile is that done is when the sprint is finished and you've got a set of code that's available. With DevOps, we extend it into production so that the definition of done means that the code is actually into production. And so that's one of the key components of DevOps. Another one is Lean. And Lean is a methodology that was developed in the 1980s, and we'll look at it a little bit further coming up, but it was adopted by Tachi Ono at Toyota, but it can also be applied to IT, and the idea is that your process from left to right, or using the first way, you want to remove any elements of waste from that process and make your process flow as quickly as you can from the beginning of development to the code being in production and available to your customers. The third key component here is IT service management. And in a number of companies, they've adopted ITIL, which is a specific method or specific implementation of IT service management. But all organizations are using IT service management in one way or another, in that everyone has trouble tickets and everyone has a change process. So whether you're using ITIL or not, you're using those processes. And those processes are integral to DevOps. However, one of the things that you'll learn that you do with DevOps is that you go to some effort to simplify those processes. In fact, to make them more agile. So in addition to the principles of DevOps, there are 5 different DevOps values that are represented on this chart. They're culture, and it's important as part of DevOps that you consider the culture that you have today, and you look for opportunities to modify that culture as you proceed on your journey with DevOps. Automation is a key value because it takes automation in order to achieve optimal speed of the process. So it's a key value. Lean is a key value for the reasons that we just mentioned, that you need to remove waste from your processes in order to speed the processes. Measurement is an important value. And what's the old adage? If you can't measure it, you can't demonstrate the results. So it's important that you measure where you are before you start your DevOps initiative, and then as you progress on your journey, you want to continue to capture those measurements in order to be able to demonstrate the value that you're delivering to your organization through your DevOps initiative. The last value is sharing, and DevOps is all about sharing. Traditionally, within IT and even within the business, a lot of times information was held close to the vest. Sometimes it was held by the managers, and they didn't even let their employees know what the big picture was and what they were trying to achieve. More recently, most organizations have been sharing things within the organization, but not necessarily sharing across the organization. And so DevOps brings this sharing value to the table, and so you want to be looking for opportunities for organizations to share along the way. Next, we'll look at these individually. From a cultural perspective, people have different values, and those lead to attitudes that they have and the beliefs that they have, which lead to customs, and you've got a cycle then associated with culture. And so one of the things you want to be doing as part of your DevOps movement or initiative is working with the culture of the organization to improve communication, and we'll look at some values here. So associated with DevOps, you want to have a number of characteristics in your culture, in that you should have a shared vision and goals, as well as incentives. In your organization, does Dev have a different set of goals, for example, fast software delivery, than operations, where maybe their focus and their goals are built around stability or trouble tickets? So you need to have a shared vision and goals. To DevOps, communication and collaboration are key elements. From a people side, it's important that you share a pride of workmanship, that you respect and trust the people, that there's a transparency and a safety. And here we mean by safety that if people make a mistake, short of them being making a mistake intentionally, that you're actually looking for mistakes as an opportunity for learning. So you're always looking to continually improve and experiment. That ties in with the third way. You're looking to make intelligent risk-taking and to learn by practicing. You want to be data-driven so that you're using the measurements to help you determine where you should improve next. And it's important that you give recognition to the employees for their participation in DevOps and their achievement of additional results or improved results. So people are the key, and as IT people, it's often the last thing that we think about. A lot of times our focus is on the technical, right? It's either what is the technology that we're using and what new technology is coming out that we can adopt, where can we automate things. It's all the gadgets and programs that excite us. But with DevOps, you have to pay attention to the people. Some organizations do that by including, sometimes their human resources organization will have some people that are familiar with the organizational change management practices, but in other cases, it needs to come from within IT. And so there are skills, soft skills that need to be developed within the organization to be successful. And you have to recognize that you can't change people, they can only change themselves. So you need to give people a vision, and that's where the vision comes in, and then help them understand the value that can be gained by implementing DevOps. You also need to recognize that oftentimes change takes much longer and costs more than is expected. This is not something that you're going to change in a couple of months or potentially even a couple of years. So one of the models that we use in our DevOps Foundation class is this particular model that demonstrates that people adapt to change at different paces. So as you're thinking about adopting DevOps, you need to think about initially involving some people that are in the innovators category and early adopters category. And people can actually operate in any of the categories, but most people have a tendency toward one category or another. So the idea behind this curve here is to show that you need innovators to be involved, and once you have the innovators involved, you can also include the early adopters. And between these two groups, you usually build the momentum that's needed to bring the rest of the organization along. So after those two groups, then once some of the people see that things can be done differently, then you're going to pick up the early majority. And once the early majority has jumped on the bandwagon, so to speak, then you'll pick up people in the late majority. The last group is the laggards, and these people are fearful oftentimes of change, and they will need to see that the new way of doing things is better. But you may find that there are some people that never adapt to the change and need to find a different line of employment, either within your company or elsewhere. But it's important that with DevOps that you recognize that people adapt to change at different paces. We mentioned that one of the values is automation. And this next slide shows a deployment pipeline, and it shows how DevOps works in that you start with development. You've got people that are building code, and with that, the next step in the pipeline that we're showing here is that the code gets committed. And as part of DevOps, the development organization or the development people are going to be committing their code sometimes multiple times a day. So the idea is that you're building the code step by step, and you're verifying that what you've developed over the last day will in fact work with the rest of the code that's already been developed. So as part of your commit then, if there's a problem identified with it, then you're going to take the pipe that goes back to the feedback loop and send it right back to development. So through this process, then you're doing some early error checking, and you're identifying issues with the code right up front before it gets any further down your pipeline. If your tests in the commit stage pass, then you're going to go to a build stage. And if you fail the build stage for whatever reason, then you're going to go back down the pipe and back to development again. And likewise, then you're going to, once the code passes both the commit and the build, then you're going to move on to the test stage, or the test piece of the pipeline, then the staging environment. And again, if staging fails, you send it back to development. So the idea here, and it's been quantified, that as bad code gets further down the pipeline, the more expensive it is to fix it, because you've got to go back to the beginning and you've got to go through all these stages again. So part of DevOps is all about identifying the problems as early as you can, and then continuing on the process. So once you pass the stage piece of the pipeline, then you go on to deployment. And one of the techniques that we use in DevOps is to build configuration into the code so that when the code is initially put into production, you can make the new features inaccessible to your customers. So think about what that means then. So traditionally, we didn't push new code to production until release. But with DevOps, by standardizing the process and doing testing all along the production pipeline, then we've built in an assurance that we can push that into production and start monitoring it before it's actually available to the customers. So you'll use configuration toggles then to determine who gets access to that new code. And you may, depending on your company policy and your customer requirements, you may take a number of different iterations of your software and move it into production without it being accessible to the customer, and then you'll release it to the customer when you're ready to give them a new package of software. So once the code is in production then and available to your customers, then you've got the feedback loop to the business where you ring the register because you're providing new capabilities to the business, which should lead to increased revenue to the business. So that's the cycle that we have for development. Oh, I was going to mention that in DevOps, you can potentially be delivering new code into production on a daily basis or even multiple times per day. So there are a number of automation enablers. So what you're looking for with DevOps is to have repeatable and reliable processes. By having a robust, stable, and resilient delivery pipeline tool chain. One of the ways you can increase the speed of your processes is by treating infrastructure as code. And here, with some of the newer technologies, you're able to write code to spin up a server or to configure a network element. And by treating it as code, then you're able to, then deploying your infrastructure becomes just like deploying new code. So one of the ways that we enable automation is through continuous integration, testing, and QA. So that's a key area to automate. And of course, with automation then comes speed. And you can use orchestration tools that will pass the software from one stage to the next stage, trigger the testing. If the testing passes, push it on down the line to the next stage, And all of that can be automated, and you can use your automation tools to determine what criteria you use in order to pass the code down the line. So it's also important that you use proactive monitoring. In fact, one of the techniques with DevOps is that you want to start building, if you're not already, into your development code the capabilities to do monitoring, so that monitoring now becomes a more powerful tool than it has been traditionally, where it was focused on monitoring the network elements and looking at memory and CPU usage and things like that. So you may want to monitor your level of transactions, for example, that are going through the system at any given point in time. So a number of different automation enablers. What are some of the benefits of automation? You can have faster lead times. You can have more frequent and less turbulent releases. You can deliver higher quality code with fewer errors. And when something does happen, you can recover more quickly because you can automate the deployment of your environment. Then if something does happen, you can very easily revert back to a previous version. And all of that leads to business and customer satisfaction. And you might say, particularly if you're an operations person, you might say, well, it looks like you're eliminating my job. And that's really not true. The idea behind DevOps and automation is that you give repetitive tasks to computers and have the computers do the repetitive tasks, and that allows you to then spend time weighing evidence, solving problems, making decisions, and using your expertise to help with the continual improvement, as well as experimentation and the learning that comes with DevOps. So with Lean, we have a quote here from Mark Cook at Kodak that success is not delivering a feature. Success is learning to solve the customer's problem. So I mentioned that Lean originally started with Lean manufacturing at Toyota, but now there is Lean IT that can be invoked, and it's a key element to DevOps with the idea of increasing your flow by reducing waste. And note the definition of waste there is any activity that does not add value to the process. We also show on this slide here the idea of a lean enterprise, and you may have a strategic initiative coming from the top of the organization that every aspect of the organization adopts lean, because that's one of the techniques that can be used company-wide to reduce waste and improve your delivery of services to your customer. So there are a number of sources of waste, and this list is not all-inclusive, but gives you some idea of some of the types of waste that you can find in your processes today. And with that, you can identify things like defects, overproduction, inventory, overprocessing, and waiting. And the idea behind identifying or looking at for different sources of waste is not so much that you've got different categories or in which category the kind of waste you identify falls into, but it's to stretch your thinking as you're trying to identify sources of waste to think about different aspects of your current processes in order to find those areas and nuggets, if you will, of waste in your organization. Measurement is a value, and there are a number of different types of measurements that you'll want to track as part of your DevOps initiative. And one important aspect to measurement with DevOps is that you measure where these measurements are before you start, and so that as you're moving down your DevOps journey, that you're able to see the value that you're delivering. And these measurements and categories are meant for illustration purposes. The measurements that are important to your organization are the ones that your company emphasizes and measures the results of your company. It's also important with DevOps that you not only consider metrics within IT, but that you also include metrics with the business. And so that's where things like time to market come into play. So the last value is sharing. And here you want to be looking for opportunities to share the tools that you have. Today, oftentimes, development has their own set of tools and operations has their own. And one of the things you want to do with DevOps is look for tools that can span the groups. There is no one tool chain that will fit for every organization. So you want to be avoiding redundant work and overcoming the traditional silo cultures. One thing that's important with DevOps is that you create common vocabularies and mindsets. Oftentimes, people in different organizations can talk past each other because they're not using a common vocabulary. And that's one of the things that we emphasize with DevOps as part of your learning, is to create a common vocabulary. So you also want to be exchanging ideas and respecting people's skills, expertise, and their commitment to the organization. So what are some of the DevOps practices then? Well, DevOps, this slide shows a couple of patterns that are associated with DevOps. And the first area is that you want to extend delivery into production. So we talked about taking your agile process, if you're using that, and extending that into operations so that the delivery of software doesn't stop with development, but goes all the way through to production. Area 2 is extending operations feedback to the project. So you want to involve operations with the development so that the non-functional requirements that come from the operations area, such as capacity, security, and some of those kinds of elements that are traditionally in operations, get considered upfront by development. And one of the techniques that we use with DevOps is to have someone from operations be a member of an agile team so that those requirements are being included up front and that operations can then understand what's coming down the pipeline. The third area is to embed project knowledge into operations. How often is it today that development does their work and maybe does some documentation in the code and then just throws the code over the wall to operations and they're expected to maintain it? Well, with DevOps, you want to be ensuring that operations understands what is being included in development, and that will enable them to be better at supporting the code. You also want to, in Area 4, embed operations into the project. And the illustration that I gave of someone from operations being on an agile team is an example of that. So if you are not familiar with Agile, Agile is built around this manifesto, and it gives you a high-level understanding of what Agile is all about, in that they value the items on the left more than the items on the right. Not that the items on the right aren't important, but you value individuals and their interactions over processes and tools. You value working software over comprehensive documentation. You use customer and collaboration as opposed to contract negotiations, and you respond quickly to change versus following a plan. So that's the Agile Manifesto. There are a number of other practices that are associated with DevOps. Scrum is associated with Agile. We've got a number of practices like continuous delivery, continuous integration, continuous testing that support the first way of increasing your flow from left to right. We've got a number of practices such as rugged DevOps and DevSecOps that are related to security. And the idea here is that you identify security issues more quickly than organizations typically have in the past. We also use ChatOps, which is a communication technique where you increase collaboration opportunities by having a chat tool available within both dev and operations to increase the flow of information. So there are a number of benefits of DevOps, and these come from a State of DevOps report. And what they found with DevOps is that high-performing IT organizations have a number of different characteristics. The first one is the peer-reviewed change approval process. So think about the opportunity to increase your speed if you can use peer review as opposed to the change advisory board that ITIL talks about. And if you're familiar with ITIL, the way you do that is through the idea of standard changes. So by standardizing your processes and building quality into your processes, then you don't need to necessarily have a change advisory board be involved in your pushing code into production. Another important element is having version control for all production artifacts. That's a very important element associated with DevOps, in that you always know where you've been, and as you develop new code, you create version control so that you can easily go back if necessary. You want to have a win-win relationship between Dev and Ops. Historically, they've had different goals, and through DevOps, you want to be coming up with shared goals so that everyone is working toward the same end. We talked briefly about the idea of monitoring and being more proactive with your monitoring. In fact, one of the things that we would do with DevOps oftentimes is to start monitoring environments other than production or in addition to production. And think about that in terms of identifying monitoring issues before the code gets pushed into production. And then we've talked about culture being an important value of DevOps, and it's a high-trust organizational culture that leads to high IT performance and overall performance of the organization. So with DevOps, you can increase your agility as well as your stability, and organizations are more agile. And with DevOps, you can ship your code up to 30 times faster. Your deployments can be completed up to 8,000 times faster, while at the same time you have reliability and that you have 50% fewer failures, and that service can be restored 12 times faster. So that's just to give you an idea of why you need to be moving toward DevOps if you're not already. What are some of the benefits of DevOps? You want to have smaller and more frequent releases with reduced effort and risks. You want to have a culture of communication and collaboration. and that through consistency, you can achieve consistency and speed through automation. And that leads to the items on the right here, and that you improve your time to market. And here we define time to market as from the time someone comes up with an idea for a new functionality until it's being delivered in production. You want to have improved integration with your business and be more responsive to your customers. And by improving your flow from left to right and providing faster feedback, you're going to increase your productivity. DevOps is all about visibility and having everyone know what's going on. So those are some of the benefits that we can gain with DevOps. So implementation. Here are a number of companies that have adopted DevOps. It's really been adopted worldwide in various vertical markets. It started out with some of the web pioneers because they needed to be able to deliver software faster because they didn't have brick and mortar stores, and if they weren't showing value to their customers and constantly increasing that value, then they were not going to be successful. But since then, financial institutions and insurance companies, some government organizations have also adopted DevOps in order to speed their delivery and improve the quality. So we mentioned earlier that some organizations are adopting DevOps teams, but it's not clear that that's necessarily the way to go, but it is a trend. So I mentioned that DevOps is a movement or a journey, and that it starts with a single step and has no finish line, and that you're always looking to make improvements. And that's what the third way is all about, is experimentation and learning. So it recognizes the unique skills and experience of each contributor and expects discipline and commitment from everyone in the organization. At the same time, it takes time and patience, and you need to learn from both your successes and your failures. So how do you get started? You get started by understanding and communicating the benefits to the organization. You can get started by analyzing your value stream from end to end and identify obvious workflow constraints and waste. You want to be looking at your feedback loops and the communication that happens within your organization, as well as assessing automation opportunities and using APIs to tie the different automation capabilities together. So you also want to agree on shared goals and accountabilities. So that's what your dev and ops people do. Then it's important that you provide training to people to help them understand, as you're beginning to get an understanding today, how DevOps can help your organization and help to establish a common vocabulary. So then we would encourage you to consider gaining an official certification, and you can do that by taking our DevOps Foundation certification class, and Walt's going to come back online here and tell you a little bit more about it. Walt?
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, we want people to take this. I mean, it makes sense, and the statistics speak for themselves. You know, organizations that implement DevOps deploy 200 times faster. They recover 24 times faster, and they have 3 times lower change failure rates. So, I mean, based on the presentation, we want to be a resource for y'all, and we'd like you to take the course for sure. We're offering a substantial discount as well. We do have a course coming up actually in a couple weeks, mid-July. And just by attending this session, you know, I mean, you are eligible for that discount as well. So I will be reaching out to you all individually to speak a little bit about it and hopefully get you signed up. This course is virtual. John will be your instructor during the course. We run it 4 days there, as you can see, July 10th through the 13th, and that'll be between 1 and 5 Eastern. It's a course that I just took, and I did pass the exam, and it was certainly very helpful for me. So hopefully, it's going to be just as helpful for you all. Do we have any questions? Should we turn it over for questions, John?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure we have a couple good questions here. Go ahead and type into the box, and we'll make sure we're answering any of your questions. Okay, I do have a question here, John.
Okay, great.
The question is, does DevOps work if it's implemented by only a group within the IT organization, or should it be adopted organization-wide? It's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the greatest benefit comes from adopting DevOps organization-wide, but the best way to start is with a single group and be able to do a pilot and demonstrate the results quickly and be able to share that with the rest of the organization. And I talked about that in terms of the early adopters and getting some people involved so that you can see the value of DevOps and that can be shown to the business.
I actually have another good one here too. Does the certification itself expire? Does it need to be renewed?
Okay, the DevOps certification does not expire. Once you get the certification, you hold it for the rest of your life, and it's recognized worldwide by PeopleCert, which is a worldwide organization that provides certifications for various disciplines. Okay, I gotcha. Let's see here. Okay, what are the toolkits that you suggest to support DevOps? For example, Trello, Travis, etc. Do you have any recommendations there? I really don't, and the reason for that is that one of the things that you'll learn with DevOps is that each company has unique aspects. It could be in terms of the languages that you write your code in. It could be in terms of the types of customers that you have. It could be in terms of whether or not you have all of your people at one site. And so the tools really need to match your organization and your customers and your expected speed of delivery. So there is no one set of tools. Okay, and I have one more here. So this question, I might have to ask for clarification. How mature does an IT organization need to be in order to start a DevOps adoption? Okay, there's really no prerequisite for DevOps. It can be adapted and scaled to whatever the current state of the IT organization is and its current state of processes. Because it's a movement and a journey, you start with where you are. You look at your people and what their current behaviors are. You modify behaviors or work on modifying behaviors, as well as look at your processes and just begin on the journey and continue to make improvements as you go along. Okay, perfect. It looks like that might be it for questions. Again, I'd definitely like to thank you all for being with us today. And this isn't just a buzzword anymore. I mean, DevOps, there's a reason it's being so widely adopted. It is very important. We'd like to help you get certified. So again, thank you all for being here. Please reach out to me if you don't hear from me first. And John, thank you so much for the webinar. It was excellent. Oh, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And we look forward to having you in a DevOps Foundation class soon. Absolutely, absolutely. Hope you all have a great week. Thanks all.